You just got bamboozled. Eric Tay, we're talking about Mirage in this Apex Legends guide. The holographic trickster. What could you say is the quick summary of this guy?
Yeah, Mirage is basically a distraction. He's the master of the juke. He's a character that allows you to be unpredictable, right? He's a hit and run tactician. Mirage is a very kind of solo player in a way, just based on skill sets, which we're about to go into.
Compared to all the other legends, I think it's safe to say that a lot of his abilities, or his 3 abilities, are kind of all, self-centered, right? Yeah, definitely a solo player, if not the most solo legend of the whole lot, in that his abilities don't necessarily help your team out. Maybe you could argue Ultimate, the Vanishing Act, where you send decoys out. Maybe that's a good way of just again, distracting an enemy so your team can live to fight another day. But yeah, let's just get right into it. His tactical, Psych Out. What can you say about this thing?
Yeah, so Psych Out's pretty cool. You're able to send out a holographic decoy that can then be used to confuse the enemy. The decoy can do different things, obviously. If you kind of point it far away, aim it far away, it'll kind of like run off into the distance. If you crouch, it'll kind of simulate a crouching motion if you're kind of like crouching and walking at the same time. So it can be really tricky for the enemy to deal with some of these Psych Outs.
You know, it operates on a 15-second cooldown, so you should be using it for the most part all the time, in my opinion. Like anytime you're in combat, firefight's just starting, send one of those away so you can have the upper hand and distract the enemy so you can engage first. And as you mentioned, the decoy will reflect whatever you're doing. So if you're sprinting, he will sprint. If you're crouched, he will crouch. You can have him stand still because your crosshair will pinpoint where he is going. So if you want to send him far, aim a little high and have him just run into the open field. And that's an interesting tactic with Psych Out is, in my experience, like the later stages of like a circle where, say, you know, there's 1 or 2 squads left and you're unsure where they are, you got a wide open range. If you just want to kind of pry the area and see if anyone's going to give, send a decoy out into the middle of the field and see if anyone will shoot at it. Then you have the ability to then pinpoint where they are because, as you know, that if someone hits the decoy, it'll give away their position.
Yeah, it basically puts this like little running man icon above their head, and it kind of points in the direction roughly of where they're shooting from, which is a great tell, obviously.
So again, that's a use to kind of lure the enemy, kind of pinpoint where they are. I would say for the most part, as mentioned, you're sending a decoy out to just simply distract the enemy team. And another way of incorporating that is for flanking, right? So an enemy sees you, or if you're behind cover, send a decoy out in one direction and go the opposite way and flank them. So you have ample time to again, flank the enemy. That's a pretty good use for it. Another cool way of using the tactical Psych Out is in the very last stages of the ring. I had this instance where it was literally one guy left. I was not near my teammate. Said enemy downed my teammate. I knew where they were, meaning I knew where this guy was right next to my down teammate. Opposed to being right next to your decoy, send a decoy off first without you being seen, and then approach late into the firefight. So again, the enemy is super focused on your decoy. And with a lot of firefights, if you are able to start hitting first, you will have the upper hand.
Yeah, and I think a point that you made to me before that I didn't really kind of think about necessarily is just how can you kind of mimic the decoy, or how can you throw out this Psych Out in the same vein as if you were the decoy in a way, right? Like, because that's really what sells the opponent into thinking like, oh, there's the Mirage. And that's when it gets like really deep, I think, is when you can start using that Psych Out tactical ability in a way that really kind of makes you feel like that's the Mirage that's actually like there.
Right, and you know, there are uses to have your decoy just stand still, but I tend to find that a very obvious way for an enemy to be like, oh, that's a decoy because he's just standing there, right? So again, aiming high and sending a decoy off for the long run, I think can be more viable than just having him stand still, right? And the last little bit about the Psych Out is when you drop in, you have actually 2 decoys at your ready. So if there's a hot spot and you want to kind of push teams away from your drop area, you're giving the false idea that there's a bunch of people landing and hopefully they won't land near you. There's another use, though, with the balloons I found scattered across the map.
Yeah, so it's really similar to when you drop out of the dropship, except instead of 2 decoys, you only get 1. It's still a great distraction tool. You know, let's say you're in trouble, you're kind of getting away from a firefight, you're like, cool, I'm gonna take this balloon, shoot off that decoy so that it buys you time. makes the enemy have to choose which one to shoot. They're not sure which one to shoot, thus gives you time to, you know, hopefully get away to safety, or just take less damage. Yeah, and I think one more cool thing that we should mention is that you can actually trigger caustic traps by sending your decoy. You know, this could be a nice cheeky play that you could pull off to potentially, you know, lure the caustic out and get some free shots on him, because he'll think like, hey, somebody triggered my trap.
Up next, the passive encore. There's not a whole lot to this, is there?
When you go down, you basically kind of like leave this decoy behind that like is like, oh, I'm dying, you know, but you're knocked still, but you're cloaked. You have 5 seconds where you're actually cloaked to kind of get away, find a nice crawl spot, or find a space away from enemies. The best case scenario that I can think of is hopefully you have a gold knockdown shield or something like that, so that you can get away and, you know, self-revive. Generally, I happen to die near enemies, which makes it very easy for them to kind of see me and kill me.
Yeah, I mean, I would agree with you. Like most instances where I go down, the enemy is very close to me. So it is in your best interest to utilize all 5 seconds and get out of sight. Get behind something, get under a house, whatever it is. But in the off chance that maybe you're really far away and the enemy is unable to get to you quick, that's a good opportunity for you to find cover. And that's really it for the passive. Moving on to the ultimate, Vanishing Act. Allows you to go cloak for about 3 seconds and send out a whole bunch of decoys to distract the enemy further. There's some good uses here. One would be to, again, hit and run tactician mindset, fire that and run away and live to fight another day. Get some health in you and reapproach a firefight differently. Any other uses you think for the Vanishing Act?
Yeah, it's definitely also good for flanking. You know, you see an enemy team that's far away, maybe pop the ultimate so that you can kind of engage your cloak. They probably don't see you. You can wrap around and hopefully get behind them, so that once you do finally reappear, you actually have your guns ready and you can shoot, you know, the enemy team. Now, it is worth noting that when you are invisible or cloaked, you cannot heal. You cannot use your weapons. If you're seen by the enemy team, guess what? They actually can shoot you and you will take damage. So it's not like you're invincible or anything like that. So you want to definitely be mindful about how you're using it.
Definitely. I think those are the two distinctions, is like if you know an enemy is looking at you and you fire off your Vanishing Act, you're not making a flanking play. You're running away. You're going to find cover and live again to fight another day. Well, that's going to do it on this guide for Mirage. We have tons of Apex Legend guides, so do check out GameSpot.com and stay tuned for more guides down the road.